Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Free Speech Forward podcast. I'm your co host, Chris Bush, and co founder of our sponsoring organization, 1776 Forward. We produce this podcast in partnership with the Institute for Liberal Values, and I'm delighted today to welcome Dumisani Washington as our guest. We're really excited to have you. Hi, Dumisani.
Hey, Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So we always like to give a little background on our guests for our audience. So on Dumisani, he is a founder and CEO of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, IBSI, and he is the former diversity outreach coordinator for the over 10 million member Christians United for Israel. He is also the host of the Truth to Power Live with Dumisani Washington podcast. He's a pastor, professional musician, and author whose latest book is the second edition of Zionism and the Black Church: Why Standing with Israel Will Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. And that to me just sounds like a fascinating topic. So I really look forward to diving into that one and just even hearing your perspective. So with that, we'll just get started. I'll turn it over to you, Dumisani. Tell us how you got onto this path of being an advocate and leader for free speech and liberal values.
Well, specifically, Tim, and I mean, Chris, sorry, I was looking at something else that popped up on my
No
screen.
problem.
Sorry about that on the computer.
Yeah.
But specifically, Chris, where Israel is concerned, and because this wasn't always on my path, it became that a little bit later on. But I began to speak out about what was going on in the Middle East, what was going on both as a pastor, but also in terms of the geopolitics, and felt compelled to do so when I heard some of the narratives that were coming out that were often very skewed. And so I inherited a big mouth from my mother,
Yeah.
of blessed memory, and I began to just speak out. It just happened that way. As I was speaking out on other things, I began to speak out on that, and one thing led to another, and we formed an organization, and I'm speaking in different parts of the country, churches and synagogues, and that really is how that happened. It was an accident, if you will. I was passionate about it, but it wasn't something that I was actually planning to do.
Well, that's fascinating. Well, and your background as a pastor, I'm sure that already gives you a platform, literally and figuratively, to speak out. I'm curious, what about the Israel issue in particular galvanized you to kind of really step outside of perhaps the religious forum to speak out?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the even the impetus for the book Zionism and the Black Church. The first edition was 2013 or 14, and this was
Okay.
in the beginning of my journey where Israel is concerned. There are different passions that I had. One of those was Africa. What was going on with Christians in different parts of Africa and the Middle East.
Mm,
That was something that I'd been doing since the 1990s. And these two things kind of married each other, both the Israel and the Africa part of my brain, if you will,
mm,
of my
mm-hmm.
heart. And so, yeah, when I in seeing these things, and this part of what having write the book as well, this long history in terms of the Black and the Jewish community, religiously, education, spiritually, the Negro spirituals. I talk a lot about that, how those songs were set mostly in the Old Testament, and Go Down Moses and Joshua at the Battle of Jericho, and why those things weren't just culturally relevant, but what they actually spoke to in terms of now. Even Lift Every Voice and Sing, one of the most Zionist songs that people, they don't realize if you look at the lyrics and understand what James Weldon Johnson is saying, very
Ah,
much so. So these were things that were important to me to actually uncover in terms of a Black American heritage. And they
mm.
were just intertwined with what was Israel, both biblical and then also the Zionism that was spoken of by people like Marcus Garvey and others. Why those issues were so important in the Black community.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. Well, and it's not like we all have our galvanizing moments and issues, I think, often that send us on the path. But given that you now are straddling multiple cultures and perhaps see the connection of this issue across cultures, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what you think is the value of this value, free speech,
Mhm.
both for society at large, for various religion and organizations and cultures, and even you personally, perhaps.
It's amazing that Frederick Douglass, in his seminal work, what to the slave is July the 4th. And people often quote from that document in which he critically looks at, among other things, the Constitution. And he calls it a glorious liberty document. Here's a man who's free, but although slavery is still legal during this time in the 1850s. The reason I
Mm-hmm.
point to that is to say that here we are, the fundamental freedoms that were enshrined by the founding fathers. A chief of those, of course, is the freedom of speech, right? The First Amendment,
Mm-hmm.
which is tantamount to the freedom of thought, right? If I can't say what I'm thinking, if I can't express ideas, then I'm no longer in a free society, right? And I believe that all of our other freedoms in this nation and within the Western world hinges upon that one freedom, the freedom to be able to express oneself the way one feels, whether it's religiously, politically, all of those things. And of course, we understand now, particularly where education is concerned and others, those freedoms are being threatened in many, many different ways. And so for our organization, joining in with other like-minded organizations, whatever their genre might be, championing free speech, I believe, is one of the most important things that we can do. So for us, being able to say and to speak and to dialogue with people we disagree with, all those things, because as the old saying goes, freedom of speech, First Amendment protects the speech that you don't like, not so much the speech
Mm-hmm.
that you do like. And that's where a free society will thrive. So that's why it's so important to us.
Wonderfully said, and you have it absolutely right. If you can't handle ideas you disagree with, that's the real test, I think, of
Mhm.
people's commitment to free speech. And
Yes, sir.
the Israel issue is, and Zionism is very, is, I feel like, has always been a hot button issue my whole life,
Yes,
and
sir.
but
Yes, sir.
it seems to go in waves of degrees of hotness, and certainly it is, boiling again now. And so I'm curious how you've even seen the impact of free speech applied to that community and your
Mhm.
efforts to fight for free speech, among
It
Jewish people.
it is, to me and to us, quite fascinating because in the context of free speech, I think, as you just alluded to, uh, there's few topics that are more hot, if you will, more controversial than it comes to Israel. When it comes to issues like racism or anti-Semitism, those types of
Mm-hmm.
things, Islamophobia,
Mm-hmm.
religious freedom, all of those things, right? All these things kind of get thrown into this same pot, which is freedom of speech. One of the things that we've been concerned with, and again, it's in different aspects of society, but I'll just make this comment in terms of the college campuses. Those who even have a tangential knowledge of what Middle East or whatever, that may not be your thing. You may have seen the huge protests and riots and
Mm-hmm.
encampments and all those things, especially post October 7th, which was the huge genocide that happened in Israel back in October of 2023.
Yeah.
So, what you've had at the center of that debate has been free speech, right? My freedom to criticize Israel, my freedom to defend Israel. That should be an open debate, right? Let's talk about these things. But unfortunately, that debate has often been shut down by violence, by intimidation, by threats, by vandalism. One of the things that we see here, again, like we often say, regardless to where you fall on that side of the that side of the debate, the
Mm-hmm.
Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if I, as a Jewish person, for example, had no dog in the fight in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in other words, I didn't really care. I don't care about the Middle East. Never
Right.
born, never been to Israel. I don't care. But you attack my synagogue, right? Or you attack my yeshiva, or you attack my
Mm-hmm.
home because Israel Palestine. How is that free speech? How now have we not now crossed over into a very dangerous territory for a rabbi or someone Jewish to then be attacked only because they're Jewish, because of what is being perceived as the Israeli Palestinian conflict? This is where we see a real line in the sand being drawn. And we've seen people, again, who don't really care about the conflict itself, but who've been vocal
Getting dragged
about,
into
at the
it.
very least, having the debate, having the discussion.
Hmm.
Yes.
Well, and as you said, I mean, if you don't have the freedom to express what's in your mind,
Yes, sir.
then you really don't have a free society, right? And
Absolutely.
it is
Absolutely.
ironic that oftentimes, and it's not a perfect overlap, but oftentimes,
Mm,
those uh, acts of aggression
mm,
towards Jewish citizens, or even people who side with Israel,
mm.
come from people who also argue that words are violence,
Yes.
right? And in some cases, that's even the
Yes.
justification or
Yes.
rationalization used
Yes.
for their own acts of physical intimidation and aggression.
Yes,
So,
sir. Absolutely.
maybe, and then maybe that's a good segue into kind of the next topic, which is how, especially as a pastor, a speaker, a writer, you obviously spend a lot of time on ideas and how to express them
Mm.
effectively. So do you have any tips or insights from your own process of preparing for a speech or something you want to write on how to communicate your ideas effectively, and in particular for people who might find themselves in a minority position or view, how
Mm.
to communicate them effectively?
It's funny. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and we're emphasizing the issue of the importance and the principle of having courage. Um, I think that what is incumbent upon us now, for all of us, whatever the topic is, whatever the issue is to be able to have the courage to share your ideas. Now, obviously, if you're in a hostile environment, or if you're speaking with someone or a group who doesn't want to hear what you have to say, we don't force that, right? You can't make someone listen to you. That's what a free society is. You have the freedom to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and someone has the freedom to ignore you, right? Or
Yes,
even
absolutely.
criticize what you're saying, right?
Right.
That's why we say we
Both.
draw the line between physical attacks. I can't attack Chris, right? I can't.
Right.
I don't even like what he's saying. I don't have the right to come in his space and that type of thing. However, I would encourage that now more than ever before, the people who are engaged in this in whatever way that they are, have courage. Your courage actually helps the broader society. Your courage to say and to think and to express what your opinions are, even other people disagree with you, actually helps contribute to a healthy society. You saying what you say, whether I agree with it or not, is very, very important, and it reminds us what we have in common as Americans, right? As those who believe in something like free speech, and me being respectful, allowing you to say it, or you allowing me to say it, and so on and so forth. That's what I would say to people. What I found, Chris, that's happened is that over the especially the last several years,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes fear starts to set in. I'll talk to people offline. Well, I was going to say this, or I was going to do this, but
Mm.
I'm afraid of X, Y, and Z. And I always try to encourage them. Don't let that be the reason why you don't let your voice be heard. Don't let fear be the reason why you don't want to. Oh, I might ruffle some feathers. Well, sometimes courage is ruffling feathers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Disrupting things so that you can make sure that your voice is being heard. I think that's what's really important as well.
I couldn't agree more. It's something. It's a theme, a common thread we hear and talk about on this show, and even in our work offline.
Mm.
You know, and it's all well and good. It's frankly something I still work on even in my own life, and to kind of talk about courage generally. But
Mm.
I always find when you're in the moment, kind of sometimes people have a hard time
Mm.
figuring out what that looks like or how to do it. So I'm curious if you've even found some
Yeah.
useful techniques or tactics, how people can maybe start to build that strength and courage or attitude, kind of within themselves.
I generally what I say, Chris, is for people, because personalities are different, right? I'm
Right.
more expressive. Some people are more quiet or whatever, if you
Mm-hmm.
will.
Reserved.
But that they find the medium that works for them. Some people are more quiet, maybe in a larger setting, but they like to write. So you write your
Mm-hmm.
article, start your own Substack. One of the things is wonderful about this modern day and age. You don't have to be a staff writer at a major newspaper to actually get your idea. You can start your own Substack. You can start your own
Mm-hmm.
website, and you can. Hey, this is I love the quote that I saw a few months ago. I don't remember. I'll butcher the quote. I saw it on Substack, but a guy was basically saying, you can either write for a bunch of people or just write for yourself.
Mm.
And I'm messing up the quote, but he's basically saying, don't let your audience size, if you will, quote unquote, be the reason why you express yourself. You might start a
Mm.
Substack and have 10 followers. Great. Write that, right? And then put that out there. So
Right.
again, that's why I say different mediums. Someone might make a podcast, make a video, make a TikTok reel or whatever. And hey, this is what I want to say. I would say that to those people. If you're not a person who likes to have the debate, you're in a room and there's 5 different people who disagree with you, that may not be how you're wired, and that's fine.
Right.
Everybody's not like that, right? But you still might want to express, and I would say at the very least, Hey, you're a singer, a musician, write a song, right? But
Mm,
say something. I'm from an older generation back in the day when you would write songs that were either politically charged or culturally charged, and Marvin Gaye turned the world upside down with what's going on, right? Back in the 70s, right? This song, he expressed what he was feeling, what a generation was feeling, but he did it in a way that made sense for him because he was a master songwriter. So I think there's different ways that people can do that. And I would encourage everyone, find what's the best for you, right?
mm.
And then make sure that you're being an authentic you as you're expressing those things.
I love that. Yeah, it's great advice, and I think it hits at a good point, which is sometimes people think that they have to, particularly to speak out on political or other kind of controversial issues, that they have to somehow be ready to go across all forums. But I like this. It's tailor it to what works best for you,
Yeah.
and perhaps build out from there, or just go and own that niche. So
Yes.
thank you for that.
Sure.
Since now that we're in the groove, to use the kind of music metaphor,
Yes, sir.
why don't let's get a little creative here and
Okay.
imagine. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you would think, or think we ought to be investing in as the most impactful initiative to grow a culture of free speech again in this country. If resources were no
Yeah.
limitation.
I continue to believe, and I didn't coin this phrase, I can't remember where it came from, but I believe that the civil rights issue of our day is education.
Mm,
I think that the more young people are able to read different ideas, book, fiction, nonfiction, heck, a comic book, right? I mean, I think that one of the reasons why we are in a difficult place as we are right now in our society when it comes to things like free speech and constitutional rights is that the literacy rates within our society are probably the lowest that they've ever been in the history of this country, right?
hmm
We're talking about up into the 60, 70% illiteracy rate within the public school system. And that's not my knock against public schools. What I'm saying is that this is actually a cultural phenomenon in our society. We've never really been here before. And as you and I know, Chris, the less informed you are, right? We're back to the Frederick Douglass thing again. What he knew was freedom wasn't just the freedom for no longer being a slave on a plantation, but actually he began to learn to read by one of the slave master's wives who
Right.
unwittingly was showing she was a very, very nice person. He talks about it in his book, My Bond is My Freedom. That's where his true liberty actually came from. He was a very deeply religious person, but how could he know the Bible unless he could be able to actually read?
Read it.
So
Hmm.
I believe that that's one of the most important things we can do, whatever we can do as a society, both locally and then on a national level, to invest in, especially I say young people, and not just young people,
Sure.
obviously, but
Hmm.
education. At literacy is one of the most important things that would speak to the freedom of a society, right, and to the unleashing of ideas. I think that this is one of the things that we're struggling with the most. That's something that I would do. Like you said, no limits on the resources and everything. Boom, anything that we can do to encourage. I'll say this last thing real quick. Back in the day, I was I don't know, maybe junior high school at this time in the 70s and 80s. Schoolhouse Rock was a thing. ABC. It was,
Yep. It
and it was
was in
this
my time
thing.
too.
Remember that?
Uh-huh.
The songs were amazing. They were catchy and everything. That's how noun is a person, place, a thing, and adverbs. And it was funny. That was a way because even
But it
then,
worked.
what's that?
It worked.
Yeah, it absolutely worked, right? It absolutely worked because even then our literacy was beginning to slip some. And so someone had
Hmm.
the idea that let's begin on the Saturday morning cartoons. Let's put these songs out there. And the songs were amazing. We're still playing for our grandkids and everything. I think that something like that needs to happen once again.
Well, and I think you're right to hit that it's a dual cultural and institutional failure, and so
Yes.
certainly reinvesting in those areas. And I like the reference to Schoolhouse Rock because it speaks to, you have to find new ways with each generation to kind of meet them where they are and make these universal topics relevant to modern audiences. But at the end of the day, just building fundamental literacy gives people the foundation that they need to go learn,
Yes.
any subject of
Yes.
interest.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's almost our time. So just any closing thoughts that you might have for, really, we talked a lot about courage and you had some great advice there, but just people standing up and speaking out for what matters to them, and exercising their First Amendment rights more readily.
I just, along with courage, I want to thank you again for having me on. these efforts with other organizations, what we have found is that it does strengthen and encourage both on a local level and then beyond. Um, the Institute for Liberal Values was one of the organizations, of course, that helped put on the education conference that was had back there in I can't remember the month. It was in Sacramento, but my calendar
Hmm.
thing is all
Last
messed up.
fall, I think.
Last
Yeah.
fall,
Hmm.
and it was amazing to be in there in that room with people from all different walks of life. One of the panels, I shared this before, were the three individuals who had all fled communist governments. One was from South Vietnam, I believe, or Cambodia. One was from
Hmm.
Russia, and another was from China.
Mm.
And they all talked about now being in a free society, right? They talked about the contrast, and then, of course, their concerns. So, what
Hmm.
I would then that conference was a real blessing. It was a wonderful opportunity. Shout out to Jennifer and all the people out there
Hmm.
who made it
Yes.
happen. I would encourage more of those things, and people avail yourself of those things when it's talking about free speech and education choice and all those things. We're really at that moment and time in our nation. If every generation has to fight for its freedom, has to fight for its opportunity to continue to live in a free society, this is ours right now when it comes to education,
Hmm.
things like free speech. So my encouragement would be those of you, particularly who are community leaders and do these things, be involved in those things. Avail yourself to those things so that they can hear your voice and they can be encouraged by what you're doing. I think that that's the way we combat a lot of the negative things that are happening, right? We actually push back and give people the opportunity to see and hear from different people as to why these principles are so important and glean from ideas that they can use to actually push this forward and keep us a First Amendment type of country in which we can say and think as we want to.
Amen. So wonderfully said. Thank you,
Yes, sir.
Dumisani.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chris.
Great. Thank you for your time. And we'll see everybody in 2 weeks. As always, you can find our podcast on most audio platforms under the Institute for Liberal Values Dissidents page or channel, and as well as on our website, 1776forward.com and ilvalues.org. See you next time.
Bye.